Hello, good morning. So we're going to continue on talking about the evidence of evolution and how we have been formed from these microscopic organisms millions of years ago. So most of what we know about ancient organisms comes from the fossil record. The fossil record provides evidence about the history of life and past environments on Earth. The fossil record also shows how different groups of organisms have changed over time. Each new discovery helps to fill holes in our understanding of evolution. When Earth first formed 4.5 billion years ago, it was extremely hot, so even the rocks were all melted. A few hundred years later, the Earth cooled enough for solid rocks to form. Surprisingly, there are fossils of single-celled organisms in some of the oldest rocks. Scientists think that all of these other forms of life on Earth arose from these simple organisms. Scientists cannot yet pinpoint, though, when or where the first life evolved. Some scientists think that cells rain down on Earth from space. Most scientists hypothesize that life evolved in Earth's oceans. The early oceans contained reactive chemicals. Under the right conditions, sunlight and lightning can change those chemicals into molecules similar to those found in living cells. More research will help scientists to settle the question of the origins of life on Earth. The fossil record shows that life on Earth has evolved. Rock layers have formed the newest layers on top of the older layers. So when we dig deeper, we see that the rocks contain fossils of only very simple organisms buried down below. So younger rocks include fossils of both simple and also more complex organisms. Looking at fossils and rocks from different time periods, scientists can reconstruct the history of evolution. The fossil record also shows how Earth's climate has changed. Some plants fossils reveal surprises, such as palm trees in Wyoming and giant tropical ferns in Antarctica. Fossils and preserved remains are also evidence of how climate change influences evolution. The structure of an organism's body is called anatomy. Similarities in anatomy are clues that organisms evolved from a common ancestor. Evidence from the fossil record and observations of modern organisms help us to reconstruct evolutionary history. An embryo is a young organism that develops from a fertilized egg. The growing embryo may develop inside or outside of the parent's body. The early development of different organisms in an embryo shows some striking similarities. So, for example, chickens, fish, turtles, pigs all resemble each other during the early stages of development. These similarities in early development suggest that organisms are created and share a common ancestor. Scientists can also hypothesize fossilized eggs to learn about development in species from long ago. Some similar structures that related species have inherited from a common ancestor are called homologous structures. Bats, dogs, dolphins, and even flying reptiles have homologous structures in their limbs. So if you're looking at this picture, for example, these are going to be resembling these homologous structures. So even though these are the beginning embryos, so we can all tell that we have this top part where we are forming the head, we are forming our eye, our top limbs, arms, and things like that. Then we have this bottom portion that looks like a tail. So we all look like a little shrimp in the beginning. This tail is going to be converted to our bottom limbs. So our legs, a tail. If you're a pig, dog, things like that, you're going to have this tail. Otherwise, humans do not have a tail, things like that. So we have these homologous structures that can be looked at. So yes, a human has, this arm and it has these specific bone structures, but these specific bone structures can also be seen in something like a pig and something like an ape and things like that. So that is what they were referring to as these homologous structures have been evolving in these primitive embryos. So there's many things that have driven extinction, but in the beginning we need to talk about changes in our species. So natural selection explains how variations can lead to changes in a species. A new species forms when one population remains isolated from the rest of its species long enough to evolve such different traits that members of the two populations can no longer meet and produce offspring capable of reproduction. There is a gradual change. So some species in the fossil record seem to change gradually over time, such as elephants. The time scale of the fossil record involves thousands or millions of years. There's plenty of time for gradual changes to produce new species. The fossil record contains many examples of species that are halfway between two others. Also, there is rapid change, so at times, new related species suddenly appear in the fossil record. Rapid evolution can follow a major change in environmental conditions. A cooling climate, for example, can put a lot of stress on a population. Only the individuals adapted to cooler conditions will survive. Through natural selection, the population may rapidly evolve to a new species. So a species is extinct if it no longer exists and will never again live on Earth. A rapid environmental change is more likely to cause a species to become extinct than to bring about a new species. The fossil record shows that most of the species that ever lived on Earth are now extinct. New predators, climate change, disease, and competition with other species are few factors that can lead to extinction. According to natural selection, if a species fails to develop the adaptations necessary to survive the changing conditions in an environment, that species will not survive and reproduce. Small populations that breed slowly and cannot relocate are more likely to become extinct. The fossil record shows that volcanic eruptions, asteroids striking Earth, and sudden climate change can kill off as many species in a short time. And there's also, of course, human influences on extinction. So some extinctions are a result of human activities. Other species struggle to survive these human-caused pollution, such as oil spills. Many scientists think that we're currently living in a time period of rapid extinction. A large percentage of the species on Earth could be driven to extinction by human activities and human-caused climate change. There were 56 species of Hawaiian honey creeper, so it's just the type of bird, known to have existed on the islands a long time ago. Today, there's only about 18 species left. Rat predators, disease-carrying chickens, malaria-laden mosquitoes, and pigs trampling their habitat are all factors driving these tropical birds to extinction. Another thing that you can think about is fields, farm fields. So if you look at this picture, for example, we have human-caused deforestation. So humans would have to come in, they would have to take down all the trees and anything that's there in order to have these fertile lands for us to grow crops. So remember, we are going to be needing all these crops, food, we can grow wood, things like that for this increasing population. So remember, our population is increasing exponentially throughout the years. So we're going to need to cut down all these trees, and when we do that, we are taking our the habitat of most of the organisms that live on that land in order to help us humans grow food. So we can start talking also about evolution, how that has been affecting us for the billions of years that the Earth has been made from. So every living thing uses DNA for genetic material. Mosquitoes, humans, plants, and bacteria all have cells with the same system of genetic material. The shared use of DNA is one piece of evidence that every organism on Earth has a common ancestor. And this common ancestor, called LUCA, the last universal common ancestor, was most likely a single-celled organism similar to modern bacteria or archaea. DNA is a complex molecule, difficult to copy without making any mistakes. LUCA started to change such as accumulated mutations or changes to its DNA. Natural selection and other processes shaped LUCA's evolution. The original population of LUCA split and diverged, evolving into all of the species that we know of. And the traces of the evolution are recorded in the DNA of every organism. Shared DNA between species provides evidence of this evolutionary past. The more similar the DNA between two species, the more closely related they are. So think about it like this. So many people believe that, that we come from, let's say, monkeys or apes. And that's not necessarily true. Evolution is just the process by which we are evolving from shared ancestors. So what happened is that we are a branch, and that branch is shared between humans and monkeys. Now, does that mean that one evolved from the other? Not necessarily. Most scientists hypothesize that that we are extremely close to these monkeys and apes and things like that because of our DNA. So our DNA is very, very similar because we're on that same branch. For example, there's other branches, right? As we have, like, for example, we have a dog, a horse, a donkey. Those are coming from the same branches. So that does not necessarily mean that a dog is coming from a horse. It's just that they share so much of their DNA sequence that we're saying that they have a very shared ancestor. So humans and monkeys are coming from this common ancestor, but for some reason, let's say there was a mutation or something that happened that made us to evolve into these two different species that we know of today. Recall that genes, DNA segments, code for different proteins. So a protein is just a large organic molecule made of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and sometimes sulfur. Proteins can act as the building blocks of first cell materials and carry out important cellular functions. For example, some muscle fibers are made of chains of the protein actin. Other proteins act as messengers, fight diseases, carry out chemical reactions, or carry out material around the body. Consider what would happen to the function of a protein if the gene for it contained a mutation. The mutant genetic material may code for a different form of the protein. The new version of the protein may increase the individual fitness. More likely, the mutation will lower the individual fitness or leave it unchanged. Changes in proteins lead to variations within a population. Natural selection acts on those variations, causing evolution. So, for example, remember that the DNA is inside the nucleus. So inside the nucleus, we have this DNA strand. It's going to make this mRNA. The mRNA is going to be traveling out of the nucleus into the cytoplasm. There, it's going to be going towards the ribosome to create these proteins. So as it is traveling in the cytoplasm, this mRNA is going to be carrying out the functions in order to be able to create these proteins. So these proteins are the ones that are going to be coding for these specific traits that the organism has. So for example, if we have a mutation of some sort, it's going to be changing that code for that protein, and that's going to be changing the traits of the individual. So if we have these mutations, and that's why we had that last week's lesson check of mutations are good and bad, and the answer is both. There's some mutations, for example, that can give us disorders like a Down syndrome, like trisomy 21. So that means that we're going to have that mutation, and then, we know the traits for a Down syndrome child. So, and that's a bad mutation, right? We wouldn't want our child to have Down syndrome. Now we have good mutations also that are like I just said, it's going to be increasing an individual's fitness. It's going to be able to reproduce faster. It's going to be able to adapt faster to the changing environment. So that's mutations can be both good and bad. So I'm actually going to pause here for today. Please make sure that you're taking good notes about this, and thank you.